Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
I had an email in from Lauren. She said, "There are words I learned some time back from the pen of my all-time favorite author, which speak wonderfully well to the issue of polyamory. The more you love, the more you can love, and the more intensely you love. Nor is there any limit on how many you can love. If a person had time enough, he could love all of that majority who are decent and just." Robert A. Heinlein, The Notebooks of Lazarus Long. Lauren says, "I think that the concept of necessary monogamy is ultimately religious in origin, though the Old Testament and its treatment of women as property is anything but an endorsement of monogamy of any stripe. I see responsible polyamory as an agreement between participants, arrived at openly and honestly, devoid of jealousy or any taint of possessiveness, where the purpose is mutual support and a joint celebration of the individuals in the group. Sure, making such a relationship work is not trivial, but for those who are self-possessed and open and generous in their hearts, it can be something truly astonishing." Robert said, "I was in a polyamorous marriage and it destroyed me and the marriage. We started out monogamous and we entered the poly world after 10 years of marriage. 3 years later, we were contentiously divorced. I can say this, marriage and polyamory are 100% incompatible because divorce has so many weapons to wield and it can get even more vicious when everyone knows everyone. I will also add that polyamory is a losing bet for a married man in American society. There is simply too much to lose." Polyamory. It's a form of non-monogamy in which women and or men establish emotionally and or sexually intimate relationships with multiple people at the same time. The partners all know about each other and are often friends or chosen family members, though sometimes they don't like each other, which can cause problems. While occasionally it translates as group sex, most often poly people interact sexually in pairs and save the group thing for socializing. That's a definition from Dr. Elizabeth Sheff in Psychology Today. She penned an article back in 2013 called What Polyamory Is and What It Is Not. And we're talking about this for a couple of reasons. One is that more and more, even here in the atheist movement, I'm seeing people talk about polyamorous relationships, how they are poly. They want to talk about this and help promote a healthy polyamorous model for other people who might be interested. And the other thing is I'm very interested in how often our quote-unquote accepted models for relationships are actually tethered to religion. Even when we don't realize it, how often do you see the protest against different types of relationships that stray from the one man, one woman model or one partner and another partner model? How often those are actually rooted in religious language and religious ideas? How much has religion infected how humans do what humans do? And so this is an exploration into some of that. As we talk about polyamory, going to talk to a bunch of different people here on the broadcast, including a panel of pro-poly activists. I'll have David McAfee, Dr. Daryl Ray, and Kathy and Boogie, the host of the Perverted podcast. They're going to join me here for the last segment of the show, and we're going to do like a big panel where everybody's just sort of, if you'll pardon the expression, playing off one another. Plus your calls, your perspectives, your input on polyamory when 3 is not a crowd. Joining me here for this next section of the conversation is Cyrus the Skeptic. I was made aware of the fact that you had done at least one video on polyamory. Is it at least one or more? Describe kind of how you've approached this, if you would.
So over time, I had kind of dropped hints on my channel that I had multiple partners, especially considering that one of them is my channel artist and one of the other ones actually runs my Discord server. So it was something that wasn't a secret that entire time. But after a while, I got enough message requests where people were asking me, well, can you explain how polyamory works? Because there's some people that think that, oh, well, it's like an open relationship, and that's not how things operate. So I eventually got to the point where I said, okay, well, I'll go ahead and make a video explaining a couple things, what polyamory is, what some of the terms mean. There's a decent few that are thrown around in poly circles, so I went over some of the basic ones and then explained how my particular grouping works, which is called a polycule.
So give me a primer. I mean, you know, I'm on the outside looking in. What are some of the things that I need to know or that need to be defined for us to have this conversation?
Some of the words that actually get thrown around a lot in poly circles that are useful to know, one of which is nesting partner. So nesting partner would be any polyamorous or any person you're dating that you are also living with, hence the term nesting partner. But if you have somebody who you are not dating, but is dating your partner, they are your metamor. So, for instance, my channel artist, her fiance is Jeremy, and as we are both dating her, we are metamors to one another. So me and Jeremy are not dating, considering that both of us are notoriously straight. So that would be kind of awkward. But that makes us metamors to one another, as opposed to people who are dating each other who are partners.
So if it's not an open relationship, you are committed partners, you just have more than one partner.
Correct. Functionally, it's no different than a standard monogamous relationship. However, there's a lot more communication that has to be involved. For instance, if you already have issues planning dates out with your partner, now imagine doing that with 3 people and also trying to make sure that everybody's involved is okay. So for me, or for us, Wednesday is the day that me and Raz go out on a date, whereas Sunday is the day that we do a triple date. And then Monday is when me and Aaron do a date. And then Saturday is when me and Emmett, who is the one who's also my channel artist, have a date. And then there's also dates planned with the other partners as well. But basically, it's a lot of paying attention to your calendars and knowing, okay, well, who am I spending time with today and for how long? Functionally no different than if you were trying to allocate time to be with your one partner. You're just having to juggle more people.
This doesn't get weird with the other partners. Oh, shit, he spent 3.5 hours with so-and-so, and I only got 2 hours. This is not a problem?
That actually does come up sometimes, and it actually is a problem when that happens, because then another partner feels slighted because they're not getting enough time with somebody who they're with. And what happens then, at least for us, is we sit everybody down at a table. Well, everybody except Emmett. She's in New Zealand. She's actually coming up in November. But everybody who lives in the house who can, we sit down at a table and we basically do a bit of round robin and go, okay, so first person, air out the issues that you have with anybody at the table. And then next person, air out the issues you have with any at the table. And then we work on solutions after people have aired out their problems. So if one of the problems is I'm not getting, actually, this came up recently. One of our partners actually started feeling very lonely, like they weren't getting enough time. So we decided to allocate another dating day that was a group dating day that would include this person to make sure that they didn't have to feel like they were slighted or didn't feel like some time that was not being spent on them could not have been spent on them.
You realize round robin would be a great subtitle for the broadcast. I'm just saying. I heard you say round robin. It was just funny to me.
Fair enough.
I mean, I'm not trying to, I myself am looking from the outside in, trying to get my head around relationships are complicated enough, right?
True.
But when you get all of these people and the dynamics of multiple partners, I have a hard time seeing how you make it work. How do you meet emotional needs for multiple partners instead of just one? I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying I'm trying to learn how this process works, right? So
luckily, when you do have multiple people that are there are some needs that it can actually be taken care of that couldn't be otherwise. For instance, me, I'm a workaholic. I put out 5 episodes a week on my channel, which you also do YouTube and podcasting and everything. So you know that that's a bit draining. That's a bit of a task.
Yeah.
So In so doing, it just happens that my channel artist also is a workaholic. So a lot of times we'll actually spend our dates working. So when we're spending time together on call and chatting and doing stuff like that, it's time that I would be, or time that I am in the middle of editing. And because they are also responsible for artwork on my channel, sometimes when I get to a point where I go, hey, I actually need this thing for this episode real quick, can you make a thing? For instance, I did a collaboration with Logic a while back, and we actually fully animated the intro bit for it, because as me and Logic were writing the script, I was just like, hey, honey, could you animate this bit for me real quick?
Very romantic. I mean, I can see the temperature rising, and that definitely. No, I mean, I get that. I mean, it's a compatibility thing. You guys have common interests. You're working on the same things, common goals together. It qualifies as you time, right?
True. And then my one of two nesting partners, the one I've been with the longest, Raz, she was actually with us at the Faithless Forum as well. She's a heavy gamer like I am. So when we're spending our time together, usually we're going to be like sitting around playing card games like Magic and stuff like that, or we're going to be playing a video game together, something like World of Warcraft or things like that. And even though we're literally one room apart, we'll end up doing online games and stuff like that anyways.
Polyamory's been sort of polarizing everywhere you go, obviously, but even in the atheist culture, you see atheists who are like, oh yeah, we're sexually liberated. We don't hold to this sort of binary model to how relationships work. And you have others who say, what the hell are these people doing? How can you make it work? How have you guys been approached by people within the atheist movement and outside of those borders as well?
So luckily, if we start with within borders, my mom knows that I'm polyamorous, which is useful because even though they're fairly conservative Christian, they also have a stance of, well, that's your business, not ours. So that largely helps that be a lot more healthy than it otherwise would as an interaction.
All right, let me stop you right there. Hang on just a second. So mom knows she's a Christian, and she's like, it's your life. I don't necessarily agree, but you do you, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Basically.
Okay. So like when you get together on Thanksgiving, who comes to the party?
So we actually haven't had an answer for that yet, because a few years back, the people that I was dating at that time weren't really big on coming to family gatherings. However, this year, we will actually everybody's going to be in the same house for at least Christmas. We're not certain on Thanksgiving quite yet. So I don't have an answer for you yet, but I will have an interesting answer for you in a few months.
Well, I'm thinking, if the Frozen Chosen see you walk in with multiple partners, they're probably thinking that they have landed on another planet. This is well outside biblical relationships.
Actually, it's well within biblical relationships.
You're absolutely right.
I'm sorry, but if we just look at the descendants from Abraham, multiple partners were involved with that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Wives and concubines. I'm doing some research now for a project I'm releasing next year, and you're absolutely right when you say that. It's funny because I always think one man, one woman, but if you open the Old Testament especially, you're like, hey, wait a minute. How many hundreds of wives and concubines did Solomon have? That's just crazy.
Yeah, when you get into that, should I have to essentially defend my existence and defend the existence of my relationship status to a family member, I can do it from within and without the Bible. I have no problem with that.
Do you think monogamy is an outdated concept?
No, not at all. In fact, actually, one of the things that I've experienced in poly relationships is partners who can only love one person. Like they actually can't wrap their head around loving more than one person, even though one of the easiest ways to explain it to somebody is, hey, if you had multiple children, do you love child one more than child two? And most honest parents will answer yes. But regardless of that, there are still some people who can't, even within poly relationships, can't date multiple people, though they're okay with their partners doing so. So I don't think monogamy is an outdated concept by any means. Holding that it's the only way a relationship should function, like holding monogamy as an ought, I have an issue with. But saying that it's an outdated concept, I think that's a bit of a stretch, because there are some people most people can't function in a polyamorous relationship, and a poly relationship is incredibly difficult over and above what you have to deal with in a monogamous relationship. So it's not for everybody, and it's by no means superior by mere merit of there being more people.
Talking here with Cyrus the Skeptic, has a YouTube channel, which I will send everybody to if you're interested. Does marriage come into play, and how does that work? I mean, do you marry more than one person?
Well, unfortunately, here in the States, there's not a legal way to do that. And even then, it can get somewhat complicated, given that there are issues with me and my primary partner that prevent us from getting married, but that's neither here nor there. Usually, if marriage factors into play, most of the time it's going to be for strategic reasons, like trying to get a particular benefit that comes from marriage, like visitation in hospitals and stuff like that. So usually it's determining, okay, who's been with who longer and how do we want to work this out? Or alternatively, one thing that happens a lot is that a couple are already married and then end up finding other people individually or together who they date. So a marriage is in that relationship by mere merit of its preexistence.
You said the words primary partner. Does that mean there's a secondary partner?
So there are some structures that are a bit more hierarchical. Ours are not really. The one that I'm in is not necessarily. But there are some polyamorous structures that have the idea behind having a primary partner and then having secondary partners. And usually the secondary partners aren't live-in partners the same way the primary one is. I don't like that structure terribly much because, in my personal opinion, it makes any other relationship outside of the one that you had first somehow a little less valid, because then the primary one usually controls a little more power than the other ones. In my opinion, that's not terribly fair to any new partners that would enter in.
I think it would suck to be the secondary. Like, well, or I'm the tertiary. I'm further down here on the chain. I'm part of the mechanism, but I'm not nearly as important as the others. I mean, that would kind of suck.
And that's one of the reasons I don't like that structure terribly much. It's one that when I was new to polyamory, I felt had merit, but that was roughly 7 years ago. And now that I've spent more time speaking with people who are poly, who've been through that and who have had multiple partners and have had multiple heartbreaks and a lot more experience, the consensus seems to be that the primary, secondary type of deal is, I don't want to say abusive, but it most certainly slights any tertiary partners that come out of there. Even thinking of them as tertiary partners causes its issues as well.
I'm going to get in a lot more to the relational dynamics between people with my upcoming guests. Are any final thoughts on this? Misconceptions about it? Stuff you wish people knew about polyamory?
So one of the biggest misconceptions that I have an issue with is people who say that, so it's just cheating that everybody knows about. And the first problem I have with that particular take is that cheating involves a violation of rules. And if the rules of the relationship allow you to have multiple partners, then it's not cheating. I've also seen not just a misconception, but a thing that I've seen people do is cheat on their partner and then hide behind the excuse that, I'm polyamorous, so it's okay. No, if you violate trust between your partner, that happens in polyamorous circles. I've actually been in a situation before where a partner of mine violated trust within the actual relationship. Like, cheating still happens in poly relationships. The only difference is that if you're dating multiple people, you're now cheating on more than one person, and that's doubly bad.
Thanks for sort of walking me through some of this. We're going to get a little deeper into it. We're going to take some listener calls on it as well. And if you're curious about Cyrus's channel, it's Cyrus the Skeptic. How do people find you? Just YouTube search?
If you go to YouTube and type in Cyrus, you'll find my name, or you can just go youtube.com/Cyrus Skeptic. You can also find me on Twitter for people who are largely okay with the dumpster fire that is Twitter.
That's a good analogy. It really pretty much is. SURIS, Cyrus the Skeptic. Thanks so much for your time. Great talking to you.
Thank you very much, Seth. Thanks for having me on.
Back to the article that I had mentioned with Dr. Elizabeth Sheff. She is an expert on polyamory and sexual minority families with children. She's author of The Polyamorous Next Door, Inside Multiple Partner Relationships and Families. In her Psychology Today article, she said, polyamory is not for everyone. It can be a complex and intense relationship style that takes time and devotion to maintain. Many people might prefer the simplicity, the security, and exclusivity of monogamy. It is not cheating, because ideally everyone is aware of the other partners. The relationships have been negotiated with rules to structure scheduling and safer sex agreements. It is not swinging, which tends to focus on sexual variety and put less emphasis on emotional intimacy among those outside the core couple. Some swingers, in fact, negotiate arrangements that prohibit emotional connection or even repeated interaction with the same, quote, outside lover. And it is not polygamy, marriage of many, because polyamorous are not always married. Even more importantly, polygamy is almost always practiced as polygyny, or one man married to multiple women. Usually in those relationships, the women are not allowed to have additional male partners and are prohibited from having sex with each other. Polyamory, in contrast, allows for women to have multiple partners as well as men. Further in the article, she said the most common form of poly relationship is the open couple who might appear monogamous, except that they date other people individually or, more rarely, as a unit. Triads and Vs, that's V-E-E-S, are relationships with 3 people. Quads have 4, and moresomes have 5 or more people in a relationship. In most groups, some members have sex with each other and others do not, though those in platonic relationships can establish enduring emotional relationships I term polyaffective. The majority of the polyamorous people in Australia, Canada, the U.S., and Western Europe, the primary geographic centers of polyamory are white, middle or upper class, highly educated people who work in information technology, education, or healthcare. Some poly people are legally married, and others span a wide range of types and levels of commitment. Some live together, usually in groups of 2 to 5, and others live alone or with roommates. Many have children, some of them from previous monogamous relationships, and others are born into poly households. Women in poly communities tend to be either bisexual or heterosexual, and the majority of the men are heterosexual, with a few bisexuals. Polys tend to be liberal, with either no religious affiliation or an uncommon religion like paganism, Unitarian Universalism, or Buddhism. Again, that's from Dr. Elizabeth Sheff in the article in Psychology Today, What Polyamory Is and What It Is Not. I've got Liz. Liz is a member of the Satanic Temple. Now, you're not speaking in an official capacity for TST, right?
That's correct. I don't have any official position. I'm just a regular member, active member in an active chapter, but I don't speak for them at all, just my own experiences. But as a Satanist, you bring a perspective to the conversation about polyamory, right? I think so. I think that the Satanic Temple's tenets mesh really, really well with how a lot of people practice polyamory. Well, how do a lot of people practice polyamory? Spell it out for somebody like me. There's a big focus on honesty. There's a big focus on owning your own stuff, like your own insecurities, working on yourself and not putting that on other people, and just giving your partners the freedom to be themselves, just like you want the freedom to be yourself and do what you want, but while being empathetic to their needs and not being a jerk about it. So what would you say? I mean, there's somebody who's the pious or looking over the wall going, oh, it's a hedonistic lifestyle where all bets are off. Mm-hmm. There are no rules. They are, they're making a mockery of relationships. How would you respond? As you were saying that, I was like, wait, are you talking about Satanism or polyamory? Because both groups get that. And it's not just religious people. A lot of people see polyamory or other forms of ethical non-monogamy as like an affront to monogamy, like we're saying that they're wrong. And I think that's where a lot of the animosity comes from, that we think we're better than them. But there are rules. It's just not that polyamory doesn't have rules, but each couple or each group can have rules of their own that they design. So it's very individualistic. It's very based on every person being different and having different needs and desires, and working together to try to make sure everybody's needs and desires are met as well as possible. It's never possible to meet everything, but as best you can, you find agreements that you and your partners can work with, and you adjust them as you go. Nobody comes into polyamory knowing exactly what they want. and you find out pretty quickly, not even pretty quickly, you find out you may not have known yourself very well at all, and you have to adjust as you go what kind of agreements that you are wanting in your relationships and what you're willing to agree to as well.
I don't know how else to ask this, Liz. I'm just going to throw it out and you can maybe rephrase it if it's better. But I mean, is a relationship, an intimate relationship in a polyamorous scenario, is it one at a time, or is there like a group thing going on? I mean, does everyone participate at any point, or is it always a select single person?
It's, again, every situation is different, just like every person is different. There's no right way to poly. Some people practice parallel polyamory where your partners never even meet each other, maybe don't know a whole lot about each other. They know they exist. We need that honesty in there for it to be considered polyamory, but they won't meet or hang out. And then there's also what we call kitchen table polyamory, where everyone can feel comfortable sitting around a kitchen table together and it not be weird. And that's, I prefer kitchen table, but some of my partners don't, and so I'm not going to push, I'm not going to make them hang out with each other if that's not what they're comfortable with. But is there group sex? Sometimes. It's very, again,
sure, I get that.
Preferences are different. Find out what works for you, and some groups are like, there's triads, which is a configuration where all three people are dating each other, and so they definitely will have that. But then there's also just basic configurations here, like a V would be two people dating one person, but not dating each other. So like a letter V, they're connected that way. But I've had that kind of thing where on a special day, like, for example, Valentine's Day, me and my boyfriend and his other girlfriend got together, we cooked dinner, and yeah, we had a threesome, and it was great. So it just really, again, depends on everybody's comfort level and what is agreed upon. We talked about that beforehand.
It's interesting.
Which is a little boring, but we did.
Well, I would picture like a business meeting. Okay, kind of here's what we gonna do, and here's what the parameters are.
We do. We really do. It's funny. But it's a little boring, but then it leads to good things. Like, I don't want to get into something that I feel pressured, or I feel like I didn't agree to something and then it happens and I'm like, well, now I feel terrible. And you can't think of everything before you make your agreements. You find along the way, oh, I should have known, but I do now that I'm uncomfortable with this particular thing. But yeah, we do have meetings constantly. There's an idea, not everyone does this, but there's an idea called a radar meeting where you kind of, like, weekly or however often you need, sit down and say, any new partners, any new interests, what are you up to, what's going on with this person, and you just kind of like touch base. It's cool.
Radar meeting, as in, is there someone new on your radar?
I think it stands for something, and I cannot remember what it stands for.
I'm sorry. That's all I need is another term. I've got nesting partner, metamor, parallel, kitchen table, triad, radar meeting. I've got all these terms that I'm navigating. Do you find it's more controversial to be polyamorous or to be a Satanist?
I haven't had too much trouble with either. I'm very outgoing and open book like, and if people don't like that about me, they'll just avoid me, it seems like. And so I haven't had a lot of, like, even my family who used to be kind of religious, now they're a little less so, and once I explain that it's not, like, as a polyamory isn't because I just figure someone's going to cheat on me anyway, might as well let them. That's not why I do that. I explain why I really believe that it's the right choice for me. And then the Satanism, once I explain, I do not believe in Satan. We're not worshiping anything or trying to summon anything or selling our souls to anyone. It's really a path of finding yourself, being true to yourself, and taking care of yourself, and respecting other people's right to do the same. And so once I explain why I do these things, why I choose this, most people in my life have been great and understanding. I haven't really had much trouble, but I'm privileged in that way. A lot of people I know have to hide. Either one. Polyamorous people have to hide sometimes. I don't have any kids. If I had children, I might not be so open about polyamory, because you can get your kids taken away. Even just they'll, call you a slut and, like, in court try to say it's bad for the kids to see this, hedonism. So yeah, a lot of people don't have the privilege that I do to be so open about it. Either one, both of them.
Back to Satanism, I'm guessing you've seen the documentary Hail Satan.
I have. Some of my friends are in it.
It's fascinating to see how the Satanic Temple is being used as a tool to help fight Christian privilege in the United States. And it really is a beautiful thing. You must have been smiling through much of the documentary.
Absolutely, and yelling "Hail Satan" every chance I got.
Liz, I appreciate the perspective on the show, and thanks for being a part of it.
Absolutely, no problem.
Let me take a short break. When I come right back, we're going to talk to a panel of people. I've got author of the book Sex and God, Dr. Darrell Ray. I've got David McAfee. He is an atheist activist and author and a proponent of polyamory. And I've got Kathy and Boogie. They are co-hosts of the Perverted podcast. One of them's a former preacher. So we're going to get into this discussion with my panel on the other side of this. Hang on. Humans have been shaving for thousands of years. Do you think our ancestors needed a gimmicky flex ball accessory to their shaving tools? You know, did the ancient Greeks look around and say, you know what, I need a heated shaving handle today? Of course not. Because a great shave focuses on the qualities that actually matter for a close, comfortable shave, and there's just no reason that you should pay the upcharge for gimmicks. 10 million people have tried Harry's for their shave, and with good reason. Low prices, no middleman, premium blades made at factory direct prices at a world-class blade factory in Germany, and zero risk to you for trying them out with a special offer at harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. If you don't love your Harry's shave, just let them know, and you will get a full and complete refund. That's how confident Harry's is that you will love a premium shave without all the retail markups and without all the gimmicks. Listeners of my show can redeem their Harry's trial set at harrys.com/thethinkingatheist. You'll get a weighted ergonomic handle for a firm grip, 5-blade razor with lubricating strip and trimmer blade, rich lathering shave gel with aloe to keep your skin hydrated, and a travel blade cover to keep your razor dry and easy on the go. Go to harrys.com/thethinkingatheist to start shaving better today. I'm going to Orlando, Florida, my friends. I hope I get a chance to see you at the Florida Free Thought Convention, freeflow.org. That's freeflo.org. A great weekend in Orlando, November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And then after that, Matt Dillahunty and I are teaming up for an event in Phoenix. And details on the Phoenix event are at my personal website. You can go to sethandrews.com/events. Right now, we continue a discussion. This will be a panel discussion about ethical non-monogamy or polyamory. Joining me, I've got author and activist David McAfee. I've got Dr. Darrell Ray, author of Sex and God. And I've got Kathy and Boogie of the Perverted podcast. And they join me here. It's great to have you all.
Seth, you rock star.
Let me start with the Perverted podcast. Talk to me. What do you guys do, and why are you perverted? What's that supposed to be? Help me out here.
Seth, as I told you before, I used to be a Christian preacher back in the day, and I did Christian comedy. And then, of course, I had the deconversion process, which took a long time. And I had ignored my sexuality through that entire time because of obviously the religious oppression of your sexuality. So later on in life, I was able to develop my kinky side and my interest in BDSM and kink. I met Kathy in the BDSM, bondage discipline, sadomasochist community. We became great friends and decided to host a podcast that talks about these things and empowers people to kind of explore themselves without the judgment, without that fear and oppression and guilt.
Darrell Ray, with the word perverted, I want to go there since you're a psychologist. You know, are there things that are sexually perverted? How do you approach that?
Well, I have a foolproof definition of perversion. It is this. Anybody having better sex or more sex than you are is perverted.
Okay.
So, amen.
I love it.
So for you, I mean, for those of us who came out of the womb of religion, in your book, if it's consenting and you guys are having a good time, it's all bets are off kind of deal. Is that the deal?
Exactly. Well, consenting among adults among people who have the ability to consent, not between priests and children or anything like that.
Yeah. Let's talk about polyamory. I've had it defined already on the show, but I'm interested in the individual approaches to polyamory. David McAfee, I'll start with you. I mean, if you were to explain it to somebody over coffee, what would you say?
The easiest explanation is just to say it's ethical non-monogamy. It's a way of being with multiple people, loving multiple people. That's the source root of the word itself. And you do it in a way that doesn't trample on their rights. You don't do it with lying, and kind of ethical non-monogamy seems to sum it up for me and most people.
Stupid question. Can you love more than one person romantically at the same time?
Oh, I'd definitely say so. I think that there's an old quote that is often attributed to Buddha, but I highly doubt that it stems from that individual. But it basically says, you don't lose any light of a candle by lighting other candles. And I like to apply that to love as well. I feel like you can love people in different ways. I feel like everybody loves more than one person in different ways, and that romantic love doesn't have to be exempt from that.
Kathy and Boogie, you want to chime in on that one?
I feel real good about that answer. Love is so subjective. You can love you can love emotionally where you have some sort of bonding or attachment to somebody, but then there's loving in action. And that type of love, you can choose to give that to any number of people in any number of ways. And when you mix that choice of giving that compassion and that caring and that nurturing and that communication in a relationship, and you add the romance to it, there's no reason why you can't do that with multiple people.
Daryl Ray, anything to add?
No, I would just go a little more basic and just say ethical non-monogamy. I love what David said there. I think what it boils down to is, as adults, we make our own rules. We're not being boxed in by the monogamy narrative of our culture. So no matter what you want to call it, some people call it, there's lots of different ways to express yourself. And we're using the term polyamory here tonight. But I think it goes even broader than that, because I think there are people who are not sexually involved with each other who still have long-term, even romantic relationships. It's not all about the sex, as Cunning Minx likes to say. Or is it always all about the sex?
You have done research in other cultures beyond the West, where the framework for relationships is not the typical one person, one man, one woman, if you're coming out of the church. Can you speak to how relationships are framed differently beyond the United States?
Well, I think if you subtract out Hinduism, Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, just get rid of those on this planet and just look at what's left, you'll see there's a vast number of cultures that probably dominated the entire planet before the advent of these patriarchal cultures. And they had many different ways of being sexual. If you look at the Hawaiian Islanders before Western contact, you could get your head chopped off for eating the wrong food. But who you had sex with, nobody cared. The Manganians in the South Pacific, girls and boys start having sex whenever they want to, as early as they want, and they're taught very early on how to be sexual creatures. And there's almost no, marriage is very fluid there. Same thing, there's a lot of cultures like that. The Hadza culture in Africa, marriage is very fluid. Couples may stay together for 4 years or 5 years, and then the woman kicks their guy out and somebody else comes in. You could have half a dozen quote marriages in that culture, and nobody would bat an eye. Once you get rid of the patriarchal side, the dominant patriarchal narrative of these religions, there's lots of other ways to be sexual. David, you probably have something to say about that.
Yeah. This is David McAfee, and I just wanted to add to that's exactly why I recommend Dr. Daryl Ray's book to everyone who asks about this, his book, Sex and God. He will tell you it mentions polyamory maybe once, but it does talk a lot about how our society and our culture specifically is influenced by a religion, namely Christianity and the Abrahamic faiths in general, that has really put people into a box that they don't have to be in. And like he just explained, there are a lot of cultures where they don't have to live by those rules, and they would kind of laugh at our system. It's all about perspective in that regard.
Polyamory, then, for you is not a referendum on monogamy. If some couples are monogamous and that's how they want to frame their relationship, you're totally in support of that. You're not saying that monogamous relationships are obsolete.
Oh, definitely not. I think that there's room for all sorts of relationships and types of relationships and dynamics. And if that's what individuals want who are involved in the relationship, then that's perfect for them. When I first stumbled upon polyamory, I went through a phase where I thought maybe all humans were meant to be polyamorous because it's pretty consistent in primates and it's consistent in a lot of animal species. And I thought maybe without any intervention, we would all be like that or should all be like that. But I know some people who aren't religious and have never been religious, and even those who kind of exist outside of our society who still feel like for them monogamy is something that they want, and I definitely support that.
To the host of the Perverted podcast, I know Boogie said you came out of the church. This is like going to another dimension, talking about this kind of stuff. If you'd have brought this into like a church singles group,
it would have been slightly frowned upon, Seth. It would have been a consistent amount of "we need to pray for young Boogie. Boogie has been possessed by something. Let us kidnap him and feed him pancakes and cast out demons." But I really also wanted to add that I think it was great that we started early with just because the human mind is capable of so many things, and maybe we have a makeup from our nature that leans towards multiple types of relationships. Where we are today psychologically, where each individual is today psychologically today, is how they can best define their interpersonal relationships. And so monogamy is absolutely a perfect working relationship for certain individuals. It may be because they have their own fears, resentments, insecurities, and narcissism, and they can't yet grasp having other relationships, even if they desire it. But there are people who are genuinely just satisfied and work the best in a one-on-one relationship, and they can actually stay together for decades and decades and die the cute old couple that I tried to be, but it just failed miserably for me.
Yeah, I'd have to say I totally agree, because while I was never a very religious person, I was definitely very spiritual. And once I had what I call my fall from grace about 8 years ago and became a hardcore atheist, even my limited spirituality was, in my opinion, holding me back. Becoming an atheist basically removed any obstacle I had to embracing polyamory wholeheartedly. Simply because I had antiquated notions about having a soulmate or finding somebody that I had a huge connection with. Having dropped those requirements made polyamory, while something that is still difficult to venture into, 100% easier for me.
Kathy, are you careful about who you tell? I mean, even in atheist circles, is it still a taboo?
No, well, not for me it isn't. I can't obviously speak for anybody else, but I am a kinky atheist into BDSM, and I don't care who knows about it. This is who I am. And while I certainly will not shout it from the rooftops or share it with my work colleagues, if you get close enough to my life, you will know who I am. I'm not going to talk your ear off about it and explain all the particulars and all the gory details, but this is who I am. It's not going to change, and I do not hide it from anybody.
You go, Kathy.
Right. Good for you.
This is David McAfee, and I just want to say that I've definitely spoken out about polyamory. I've posted articles about it. I've posted images about it on Facebook and online. It doesn't come up organically in conversation much, but I am active in talking about it when I can online. And the reason for that is because of the reaction when I first announced that was something in my life. It was basically just saying, hey, I have this other girlfriend now, and we are all in an open, honest relationship, and it's perfectly okay. And that was it. And a Christian apologist who has written critical reviews of of my books, of my atheist books, compared it to bestiality and said, add that to the list that includes things like abortion, infanticide, incest, and bestiality, and basically just kind of spammed this all over my page. And I realized pretty quickly that this was an issue that had stigma, just like atheism and just like other issues, mental illness that I talk about. And so, yeah, I just added it to my repertoire of things to discuss.
What's interesting is, though, there seems to be a stigma even among atheists, many atheists.
Sure.
Oh, definitely.
Well, Boogie here.
Well, we don't experience that. I'm amazed that here in Kansas City, we have a very large polyamory group here, and the atheist group and the polyamory group overlaps, I would say 50% or more. There is no stigma here. We even had a panel discussion a couple of years ago at Oasis, and Seth, you've spoken at Oasis.
Yeah.
A panel discussion with 4 poly people up front, and that was the best attendance we'd ever had. Like 270 people showed up that Sunday to listen to a concept. This is probably 3 years ago, I'm thinking. So there's there's almost 2,000 poly people on the meetup site here in Kansas City alone. And that's just the people who are open about it or out about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty amazing. I think there's a spectrum, and we're talking about monogamy versus polyamory, but I think there's a spectrum, as there is on a lot of things. There's even a life cycle. I think there's, at some points in your life, you may be very committed to an exclusive relationship. And then later in your life, something flips, something changes, and that's no longer healthy for you or good for you. It's like a lot of things in life. Things change. Our attitudes change. I was raised in a very religious environment. I couldn't even imagine anything but monogamy when I got married at the age of 20. By 38, after 17 years of marriage, I realized I got exposed to Dr. Deborah Annapol's book, Loving More, and I thought, wow, this is cool. And I should have listened then, because it took me 10 more years to become poly. But I've been poly now for 20 years, and I wish I'd done it much earlier. It fits my personality much better than monogamy.
What caused you to hesitate? What cost you those 10 years?
They didn't have the internet. You couldn't find anybody. I tried hard.
He wasn't shy. It was just he didn't have a wide enough reason. Okay,
David, right. You guys got it easy, Kathy, David. You got it really easy. You got the internet. I didn't have that in 1988 when I got divorced.
We're not really that young. I was around pre-internet too.
So how do we get past the jealousy question? You've got multiple partners. You've got intimacy and closeness and time and all of these things. How do we keep a relationship together when there are multiple people who are intimate and then you are off with someone else in some way? I'm not even sure how to ask the question, but you understand what I'm trying to say. How do you address that?
Jealousy is a huge component in polyamory. It's probably one of the biggest obstacles there are to overcome, simply because it comes so naturally to all of us. But it is also very frustrating to me, because it happens to be one of the things that most people who are not familiar with polyamory will cite as the one reason why they can never do polyamory, when in reality, jealousy is just like any other difficult or unwanted emotion that you don't want to have. You have to work at it. The notion that it's ingrained in who I am and I can never get past it is, in my opinion, erroneous. It is something that you have to work at, because it comes into your mind unbidden, and it can wreak havoc if you don't deal with it up front and communicate with your partner or partners. But it is absolutely something you can overcome. You just have to know that it's, for most of us, going to be this monster on your shoulder for the majority of the time. And there are absolutely people who don't have that big of an issue with it. But in my experience, they are few and far between. And as long as you go into it knowing that you're going to have to address this issue constantly, then it's half the battle, in my opinion, because you know it's there, you know you have to deal with it. It's just that you have to bring out the courage in yourself to actually discuss what can be quite shameful to yourself, what is difficult to bring up, and what has the potential to hurt your partner or partners.
Boogie here. Let me just add on to Kathy. Jealousy occurs pretty consistently in all monogamous relationships as well. It's just we have to face it more because there's more people involved in that intimate, close sense. But I know I was plenty jealous when I was monogamous, and that had to do with how I viewed myself and my own fears and resentments and insecurities. And that, once again, as Kathy said, had to be dealt with. But jealousy is something, just because you only have one partner doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with jealousy.
Yeah, this is David McPhee. I was just going to say that I do agree with everything that they just said, and this is also the biggest question I get when I talk about polyamory or when people ask me about polyamory. There are a few things that I tell them. For one, there's a workbook called the Jealousy Workbook that I recommend to pretty much everyone, and it helps them kind of work through these issues in like a questionnaire type basis and helps them understand what is the reasons why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. So that's one thing. And also a component of this is that you have to also start trying to see the compersion side of things, which is basically the opposite of jealousy. Compersion is feeling happiness and warmth and joy in seeing your partner happy. And in poly community, that means happy with another person. They're making them happy. So that should also make you happy. And that's something that I found very helpful as well.
Should is a pretty crazy word.
I think it's helpful to break it down to its component parts. I think jealousy is a pretty useless word because you can break it down. It's like I have an engine, but that engine's got component parts, and I can repair I can't repair an engine. I have to repair the parts within the engine. So if you break jealousy down, you look at it, it's fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of loss of resources. There's a lot of fear and then there's possessiveness, cultural ideas about ownership. Every pop song played on the radio practically says, I belong to you or you belong to me. This whole ownership notion is a pathological idea that we've got in our culture about how we relate to other people that we're sexually involved with. When I've got people sitting in my office and we're talking about jealousy, I break it down. See, let's not talk about jealousy. Let's talk about your view of other people. Do you feel like you own them, or do you feel like they have agency? And do you feel like they're going to leave you and take their resources with them? Once we find that out, then we can work with those component parts. And it's really amazing how quickly things can change from that point on.
Anything else I'm missing? Anything that's a misconception or a layer to the onion that we've missed so far before I sort of just start to call it a day here? What do you think?
Well, I Boogie here. I think for everyone that's out there that has had, like me, that prepubescent fantasy of sex with multiple partners, 2 chicks, 1 guy, 3 guys, 1 girl, 3 guys, 3 guys, whatever your thing was when you were growing up and you were like, oh, this would be the greatest moment of my life. I just want to say, you were right. It is amazing. It is freaking amazing to have sex with 2 women at the same time and be able to orchestrate that. It is absolutely everything you ever dreamed. But in your fantasy, that was all you. You were each one of those partners. But in reality, if you want to have successful interpersonal relationships with multiple people, you have to understand that they are their own individuals, and you have to be compassionate and understanding and flexible to have that interaction with another human being and not just your fantasy. And a lot of people come in with that puberty fantasy and they think that's how it's supposed to work out, and it doesn't. But if you're willing to take that adventure in getting to know those other people and finding out what their limits are and how they view their sexuality and a relationship with multiple people, that's when you have the chance to have that connection and have the greatest effing sex you'll ever have in your life.
Kathy, anything you want to toss in there?
I don't think I can follow that up.
I'm not sure anybody can, but Daryl Ray or David McAfee, you guys have anything else you kind of want to put an exclamation point on the end of this discussion?
Well, I'll just say after 20 years of being poly and one of my partners I've been with for 18 years, and we travel the world together, and my other three partners know all about that. It's not a big deal. Once you start a relationship, the thing that I would say is get your own act together, and before you ever date, or when you start dating somebody, the very first date hardly, almost, tell them you're poly, or explain your poly, or educate them about what your poly view is, because you don't spring this on somebody 6 months into a relationship. That's much more difficult. So, yeah, start early and educate people, and maybe you'll find somebody, or maybe it'll work for you.
David McAfee?
I also totally agree with what was said earlier about the best sex on the planet.
David?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for putting this together, because I've heard some really insightful things tonight that I don't really hear all that often. So you got some really great guests, and you guys are experts, and you're amazing. And I'm happy to even, share the stage with you guys. The only thing I'll add is just that a lot of people get excited about the best sex that they've ever had, and like he just mentioned, there's a lot more to it than that. And the biggest component, I think, is honesty. If you're going to remember anything from after this discussion, I would say that honesty, being open and upfront, is infinitely better. It will always serve you better. And it's kind of the difference between this type of ethical non-monogamous relationship and most monogamous relationships, where you don't tell them when you're having you have the same feelings for people, but you don't mention it, and you kind of keep that bottled up. And that's because a lot of the reasons that Dr. Darrell Ray has mentioned, because of society. And so, just being upfront, being honest, telling people what's on your mind will work better in every relationship, but especially in poly ones.
You mentioned Dr. Ray's book, Sex and God. Any other resources for people who are, even if they're just curious, not if they necessarily want that for themselves, but they want to find out more, to educate themselves? Where would you point them? Anybody?
I think the Jealousy Workbook is a good book for even anybody just considering it, because I think it would help people in monogamous relationships, even though it's geared toward poly people. There's also, just so many other books. The Ethical Slut and a book called Open are both really well known and good resources that I recommend. So along with Dr. Darrell Ray's book, that's what I tend to recommend for people.
Anybody else?
Opening Up and More Than Two are both good books as well.
Opening Up and More Than Two?
Yeah.
Yep, I second that.
Okay. Kathy and Boogie, anything besides your podcast, of course, which,
of course, the world's
an invaluable
greatest world podcast next to Thinking Atheist, of course. I loved your Richard Dawkins jam, by the way.
Oh, you're very kind. Yeah,
it was well put together. I enjoyed it very much.
This is why people can't trust me with the nice stuff. That's the kind of stuff
man.
I do with it.
Shameless self-promotion. You nailed it.
So, do you guys?
Hey, Seth, you need to get these guys back on to talk about BDSM, though. That's the next step here.
Sure. Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, as long as we're going down the rabbit hole,
as it goes very deep.
Is everything a double entendre once we get into? I just don't know. I'm just such a minnow in this ocean.
Take the red pill, Seth. Take the red pill.
Did you guys have any resources beyond your own podcast? Anything that has helped you that you would want to mention to anybody else?
They handled all the good books, and I've seen a lot of those books, especially Ethical Slut. It was kind of a standard. There are a lot of groups online. There's a website. It's a social media kind of site, FetLife, like Fetish Life, FETLife.com. You can go and make a free profile, put a picture of a cat or so. Don't put your name on it, whatever. But you can go on, and they have groups, and they have dozens and dozens of polyamory groups. Any type, just type in the search for groups, polyamory, triads, all different types. And there you can see people who are living these relationships, having discussions about those activities and those types of relationships in their life.
One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is not because, again, Natalie and I are in a committed monogamous relationship, and that's what we want for us. But, stepping out of the church gives me the opportunity to have conversations that would have otherwise been off limits, taboo, out of reach. You don't touch it. You don't talk about those things. And we get back to the word perverse or perverted. And so, being free of religious dogma allows me to get educated about things I normally would have just remained happily ignorant about or afraid of. And so being able to have these conversations for me is it's very interesting stuff. And I think the same has been true for many of our listeners. And I want to thank all of you guys, Dr. Daryl Ray, David McAfee, and Kathy and Boogie from the Perverted podcast. You guys have been great guests, a great panel. Thanks again.
Thank you, Seth.
So
You're a rock star.
Thank you, Seth.
I guess we've covered this about as best as we can, as best as I can, anyway. We're going to kick off the month of October in style and start to get in the Halloween-y kind of vibe with a special guest on Tuesday of next week. Caitlin Doty is going to join me. She's a mortician. She is the creator of the Ask a Mortician web series. She's founder of the Order of the Good Death, and she's got a new book out. It's called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Big questions from tiny mortals about death. We're going to talk about death with a mortician. Next Tuesday, Caitlin Doty will be here, and I will see you then.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.